Okay, I have 1 minute after 2 by my clock, so I'm going to jump in and get started. Michael Kilkelly from ArchSmarter, and welcome to How to Create a Project Dashboard using Revit, Dynamo, and Excel. So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I firmly believe that we as architects need to become more familiar with and definitely more facile with working and manipulating the data that we're generating. BIM has given us a great tool and a great ability to understand, know, and design our buildings better. Understanding our buildings through the data, though, not just visually, gives us a way to design better buildings faster. And I also believe, too, our clients are expecting more from us in terms of this data-driven design because it helps them make better informed decisions. And most likely, they're leveraging their own data in their own business. So we're living in an increasingly data-centric world. And again, I feel like for us as architects, as designers, as engineers, we have to embrace the data. We can't be afraid of spreadsheets. We can't be afraid of, databases and those sorts of things. We need to get in there. And it's just going to make us better architects, and it's also, going to allow us to create better buildings and hopefully, make everything a better world. So that's kind of my soapbox speech. This topic, again, I'm really passionate about because it takes a lot of the things that I discuss and have written about on ArchSmarter, and that's specifically using Revit in BIM, looking at how we can start using Excel more effectively, and then also about how Dynamo can help bridge the gap between kind of the data and the design. So what we're going to talk about today is dashboards, and what is a dashboard, why you should use one. We're going to go through some key elements of dashboards, and then I'm going to take you through the process of creating a dashboard using Revit, Dynamo, and Excel. So it'll be kind of a walkthrough tutorial. And also at the end of the presentation, I have a special offer for you about a new course that I'm going to be launching next week. So stay tuned for that. But let's jump in and talk about our dashboards here. Okay, so first off, what is a dashboard? Well, it's a visual tool. It presents data in a useful and meaningful way. Typically, dashboards will focus on some key metrics or what are also referred to as key performance indicators. Sometimes you'll see the acronym KPI. And so that's really what a dashboard will focus on, those particular things that are of most important. Generally, when you see a dashboard, it fits on one screen. Again, it's presenting data usefully, and it's also making sure that it's very clear about what you're looking at. And a lot of times dashboards are interactive, so you can see the data, and then you can also drill down and find out very specific values or metrics about parts of that dashboard. So here are some examples. This is a web-based dashboard, and you can see it deals with sales. And if you look at it, again, it's very visual. So a lot of this data you would get typically out of a database in a spreadsheet, and then this just gives you a picture, if you will, to see where you are relative to those metrics. So here's another example, and again, looking at sales, but you can see, it's color-coded, it's graphic, there's not a lot of numbers. So you can look at this very quickly and get a comparative understanding of how things are going. Another one here, and this one I kind of like, it's a little bit more graphic, and they've even used kind of the little dashboard-like gauges down here at the bottom, but still very visual. You can look at it in a glance and understand what's going on. And here's the last one. This is one that I actually use every day. This is the dashboard for the ArchSmarter website. And so I can look at this, and there's only, on a daily basis, a few things that I care about, and mostly I'm looking at my site stats. And so I can see how many visits I'm getting per day. And then, I can look at here, and on Monday and Tuesday, I had a lot of visits. I can see what the top posts are, what top searches are. So I'll look at that, periodically throughout the day, and it's going to tell me useful things. So, Wednesday relative to Tuesday, I don't have as many page visits, but I can do it very, very quickly. Now, why would you want to use a dashboard? And it all comes down to accessing information. So you want to look at it and understand what's happening. So again, going back to my website dashboard, I can see what's happening very quickly. I can just see a snapshot. I don't have to get into all of the data, sift through it, try to figure out what's going on. Now, dashboards also typically will use real-time data. So again, you're seeing things at that very minute, and you're seeing things relative, to another point in time or to other similar kind of data sources. And then lastly, one of the benefits to a dashboard is that you can take data from multiple places. So you may be getting, data from one database or something else, and then you can bring them all together into one place to see them relative to each other. In our case today, we're going to be looking at data coming out of a Revit model. And so, we're not necessarily going from multiple data sources, although we could take an aggregate data from, multiple Revit files. But we can also aggregate data from different aspects of our model. We may want to get room information. We may want to get area information. We may want to get floor information. So we can take those out individually and then put them into our dashboard and see them relative from one to the next. Now, there are three key elements of any dashboard. The first thing that we're going to need is a data source. So a data source, can be, again, anything. It can be a database, can be metrics from a website, anything like that. And then you also need a connection to the data, a real-time connection. So you need to get that data from, that original data source over to someplace else. And that someplace else is the way that you're going to visualize the data. So for us today, our data source is the Revit model. So we're going to be pulling parameter data out from Revit. Our real-time connection is going to come through using Dynamo. So we're going to create a Dynamo graph that's going to basically take parameter data out of Revit, and then it's going to put it into Excel. And then our way to visualize the data is going to be in Excel. So we're going to create a dashboard using pivot tables and pivot charts, and we're going to use that to create the dashboard itself. So now how, in an architectural setting or an engineering setting or, as a designer, what would you use a dashboard for? And these are just a couple ideas that I had. One is that you could do it, if you're in concept design and you're doing a master plan and you want to understand, your areas relative from one scheme to the next or from one building to the next. If you're in schematic design, maybe you could create a program and room area dashboard. So you may have created your program and you want to see how your building stacks up relative to the original area requirements in your program. As you move into design development, you could do a curtain panel type dashboard that would show you all the various combinations and sizes of your curtain panels. Maybe you get into construction documents. You could look at creating a furniture, fixture, and equipment dashboard that basically aggregates all the FF&E data. And you could look at that, especially if you're looking at different office configurations, and potentially even tie that into cost. And then, any other ideas? These are just kind of four of them off the top of my head, but I'd love to hear from you about what things you think you could measure coming out of Revit, how you could measure it and visualize it graphically. Another idea that comes to my mind is looking at when you're in construction administration. And so potentially, if you could look at what areas of the building are generating RFIs. So you'd have to get that data either tied into the Revit model, or you could kind of aggregate it from another source with the Revit model, and then you could see where, which days generate RFIs or which parts of the building generate RFIs. So one comment here too, energy use, that would be a big one. And there are energy modeling tools out there, but I think in some ways too, if you could take that data and then just look at it in a dashboard format, stripped down, that would be really, really useful. Especially, again, a dashboard is great when you're getting it real time. So if you're in kind of early stages of design, concept, or even schematic, to see your energy use as that changes based on changes in the envelope. Okay, so we're going to jump in and get started. For today's session, I'm going to walk through a tutorial looking at kind of the master plan example. So I have a Revit model set up, and it's pretty basic. You can see, and actually I'm going to switch over to Revit right now. And let me make it bigger. Okay. So here is my Revit model, and we have here 6 kind of mass buildings. So I just created these as in-place masses in Revit, so I can kind of push and pull them as I want. I've added mass floors, and it's very, it's very straightforward. If I click on the floor, though, each floor I can get some information from them in the properties, if you can see this, but essentially I can get my floor area, floor perimeter, I can get the exterior surface area, I can get the level, and I can also define the usage for each particular floor. So I've gone through the model and I've identified usages for each floor. So we have office, we have residential, we have retail, and then we also have educational. So I'm going to just open up my schedule here, and you can see, it might be a little bit small to see, but essentially I have every floor here listed, and then I also have its usages. So like I said, retail, office, residential, so on. So we're going to create a dashboard that we can use as we start to manipulate our massing model, and as we start to add floors, add buildings, change usages. We can see how our overall area is changing and also our distribution of usages. So, how much, what percentage of retail do we have? What percentage of residential? How is that mix across all the buildings? So that's the idea. Let me switch back to 3D. And as I said, we're starting in Revit. We're going to extract all this Revit data, and we're going to use Dynamo as the means to get that data out. So I'm going to go over to my add-ins, and I'm going to pull up Dynamo. Now I'm curious, have you used Dynamo before? Are any of you familiar with it, looked at it, totally new? Did you sit in on my Dynamo session a few weeks back? I'm just curious to get your feel for Dynamo. And if you haven't used Dynamo, it's a free download that's available from Autodesk. It's an open source project, more or less, that Autodesk is supporting. If you go to, I'll pull up the website right here. So the URL is dynamobim.org, and this is the Dynamo website. They have a lot of tutorials. They have a really good forum and community center. And if you click on the download button up here on the right-hand side, you can download, the free version of Dynamo. It is evolving very rapidly, so there's a new version coming out. Pretty much, it seems like almost every week. I have a new version came out yesterday, which I haven't downloaded, so it's telling me I need to do it. I'll do it after this session. But again, it's a free download, and so it's definitely worth checking out. So I have Dynamo open, and when you create a Dynamo file, they're called graphs. So that's what we're going to be making, is a Dynamo graph, and it's going to associate itself to the current Revit model. So whatever Revit file is active when you open Dynamo, Dynamo creates a link and association with that file. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new graph here. And for those of you that are new to Dynamo, Dynamo is basically a visual programming environment. And as you'll see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be creating or dropping nodes here that are essentially blocks of code. So, and then we're going to group and organize our blocks of code. And it can look a little bit confusing at first, because essentially I'm connecting them with wires. But there's definitely a logic to what we're doing. And I'll walk you through step by step how we're going to do that. So let me get a sip of water here. So for our Dynamo graph, what we're going to do is we're going to extract all of the mass floor information. And we have specific data that we want to get out. We want to look at, that for each mass floor, we want to get its level, its area. We want to get the usage parameter. And then we also want to get some things about it, like which building is it coming from. And we'll also look at the exterior surface area. We could get the perimeter as well. So we can take that data out and then put it directly into an Excel file. So to start, I'm going to get all the elements of a particular category. That category is our mass floor. So on the left-hand side here is in the Dynamo interface. And I'm not going to get too much into the particulars of Dynamo since I covered it in a previous webinar. And I'll include a link to that webinar if you want to watch kind of the basics of Dynamo. But essentially on the left-hand side here is my library. So I can just type in the search bar, and that's going to give me all of the nodes. I can also click in here, and then as I click into them, I can grab a node. And all I have to do is drag it onto my window right here. And then I have that node, and I can start adding stuff to it. So the first node I'm going to start with is called All Elements of Category. And it helps if you can spell correctly. And sometimes it's tricky. Here we go. A lot of times I spend, a few minutes rooting around through here trying to find the right node. So this is what a node looks like. It's basically just this rectangle. And you'll see on the left-hand side it says category and then elements. So the idea, the kind of anatomy of a node, if you will, this is the name of the node at the top. On the left-hand side where it says category, that's an input. So I need to provide it with a category input, and it will spit out all of those elements that are of that category. So I'm going to grab another node, which is just called categories, and I'm going to connect it. And all I do is I connect the output from one node into the input of another. And now I can go down and I can use this drop down, and then I can just look for any category I want. The one I'm looking for today is called mass floor, but you can see there's a lot of categories in here. So I can get mass floors, mass form, anything I want. So I'm going to choose mass floor. And so right now I have this set to run automatically. So on the lower left-hand side, I can choose to run automatically, or I can choose manual. I'm going to keep it for automatic. That way, anytime I make a change to my graph, Dynamo is going to do that computation automatically. So if I click here, and I'm just going to open this up, now I can see all of the elements that are collected. So Dynamo went through my Revit model and pulled out all of these mass floor elements. And I can see this is actually showing me its ID, its element ID number. So now I have this collection of all the elements. What I want to do is I want to get some parameter values out of them. And there's another node that I can use, which is called get parameter value by name. And let's see, here it is right here. So I'm just going to click on that. And this is a good node because I can basically just provide, I'm going to see if I can turn that off. Oops, delete that. Scroll out a little bit. So I can provide any element to this node, and then I also provide the parameter name, and Dynamo will get that parameter value. So I'm going to just double click and I'm going to create a code block. And a code block is kind of like a generic node that I can just type something in. So I can type numbers in here, I can type text, I could even type formulas. So for the first thing I want to get from our mass floors, I'm just going to type it here. In quotes, I'm just going to type level. And then end quote, and then I put a semicolon at the end. And now I can connect that. That's essentially telling Dynamo that this is a piece of text, so it's a string. And if I go over my get parameter value by name, I can see that I need to provide it with the name of the parameter whose value you want to obtain, and that value of the input is a string. So that's what I have here. And I can just connect the two. And now when I click down here, I can see that I'm getting all of the levels from all of the floors in my model, which is pretty cool. Now, I want to get some other data out of here as well. So in my code block, I'm going to add some other strings. So let's say we want to get floor area, and I end the quotes in the semicolon. And I can actually, at this point, it's useful to go back into Revit, and I'm going to click on a floor object, and I can see here are the parameters that are available. If I had any shared parameters or custom parameters, I could also extract them in this way. So I'm going to get floor area. I'm getting the level right now. I want to get the usage, and I'll probably get the exterior surface area. So I'm going to basically create a bunch of nodes like this to get all those parameter values. So let me just type in all the ones I want to get. So I'm going to get, I'll zoom in here. Oops. You can see I didn't complete my code block, so it got red and got mad. Okay, so we'll do usage. We'll do mass colon space family, and we'll do there's a question, are code blocks case sensitive? That's a good question. I'm going to test that out. Let's see. Let's get mass, and we'll get the other one, family, and type is another parameter. And the last one, let's try exterior surface area. Okay. So here are all of my strings. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to create 6 copies. 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's get one more. And then basically what we're going to do is we're just going to plug in our string values here into each one. So we're going to get all of those parameters. Okay, so let's just connect these up. And this is when I said sometimes Dynamo gets a little bit confusing because you can see all of these wires are going from one side to the next. So it looks a lot like spaghetti after a while. And let's plug in the last one. Okay, so let's take a look. We can go through each one, and at this top one, we're getting all of our levels. The next one, let me pull this over. Here are all our floor areas. Okay, looks good. And then we're getting all of our usages. And lastly, we have mass family, which is essentially our building name. Then we have the the mass family and type. And then we have the last one. Okay, so this was the one where I checked the case sensitivity. So it is, in fact, case sensitive. Let me change this, which makes sense. Okay, so I just updated that to use the correct case, and let's check. Okay, so now we're getting the exterior surface area. So these are all parameters that I can get, out of Revit from my mass floor. So I'm just telling Dynamo, these are the parameters that I want to collect. Now, I have the parameters. I need to actually put them into something, because ideally where we're trying to get is we want to put these into a list, and then we're going to put that list out into Excel. So this is the data that we're going to collect and put into Excel. So I'm going to use another node that's called list.create. And I'm going to add 6 items to this. One thing to note when you're typically, this is true of Dynamo, and this is true of pretty much every programming language. A lot of times if you have something that like a list or an array, a collection of items, the first item is not known as item 1, it's always known as item 0. It's just one of those things for computer languages. So you'll see that the first item that I'm going to connect is item 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so all I'm going to do is just plug in my values, my lists from get parameter value by name into my list. And we're going to do some things with this list, but essentially this is what's going to go into Excel. Okay, so now I have a list, and I can take a look here and I can scroll through. And you'll see that what I've created is not just one list, but I have what's called a nested list. So I have a list of lists. So the first list contains my level names. The second list contains my areas. The third list is my usages, and so on and so forth. Now that's not really how we work with things in Excel. We kind of want to see things, not this big long list of things. We want to see it across. So I want to see for this particular floor, I want to see its area next to its usage and so on, like in a tabular format. So let's just create or drag in what's called a watch node. And watch nodes are cool because it'll show you what's going on inside of a node. So here is this watch node. Oops. So I can see everything that I'm getting out of this list create node. Now I'm going to add another node called list transpose. And what this does is it swaps the rows and columns of a list. And this is something that kind of threw me a bit when I first started using Dynamo, partly because I had, I've done a lot of work with the Revit API and programming, and it works a little bit different in terms of how you get things in and out. So once I figured out, okay, I just need to use list transpose, it became a lot easier. So when I connect this, let me zoom in, now what it's doing is you can see it's grouping all those parameters together. So item 0 is the first floor that's coming out. So here's its level, its area, its usage, the building, and then its exterior area. So I'm just going to copy so I can select a node. I'm going to go to Control-C, and I'm going to paste it. So I can always copy and paste nodes. And now I'm going to just do a watch on that. So if I zoom in, I can see the original list relative to the transposed version. And this shows me, again, it's kind of went from 6 lists. Now I have a list of 31, actually 32 lists here, but it's grouped them. So I'm getting, all of the parameters from one floor, then all of the parameters from the next, and the next, and the next. Okay, there's a question about multiple RVT files. That's a good question, Justin, about linked files. I think I'm going to have to do some testing on that. I'm assuming we'd have to do something different. There may be a specific node about linked files. I haven't tried that, but that's a good question. Okay, so now that I have my list and I have this in the format that I want, this is pretty much how I want to send it out to Excel. So now I can get to work on exporting it out. And fortunately, and this is one of the great things about Dynamo, is that there are nodes that work really well with Excel. So I have a node here that's called Write to File. And with this node, I can take a list, which is basically my data here, and I can just put it right out to Excel. Now, there's a couple things I need to provide it with. So I need to give it the file path. I need to tell it the sheet name, the start row, the start column. Then I need to get it the data. And I also have a node, there's an input here if I want to overwrite the existing file. So one thing too with Dynamo that's great, because it's open source, there's a lot of nodes that are available. So when you first install Dynamo, you're going to get the basic nodes, and then you can see here I've actually added a whole bunch of additional libraries. So when you're in Dynamo and you go up to the upper left packages, I can search for packages that people have created, and these are kind of they've been created and are freely available. And there's a whole bunch of different packages that do all sorts of things. And there's some that do some really interesting things, like Clockwork is a good one, has a lot of great tools that you use on a regular basis. Lunchbox is another one, but you can pretty much just do a search, and then you can find a node that, is doing, depending on what you're doing, you can, in a lot of cases, find a node that will do it. You can also create your own nodes, and if you know Python, you can create your own Python nodes. So there's a lot of flexibility in here. And there's a lot of people who are basically just creating tools that you can add. So let's get back to Excel. Now, first thing I need to do is get a file path. So a file path, there's a specific node for that. I'm just going to type file path in the library. And, oops, sorry. Sometimes you click a node twice and you get 2 versions of it. So I'm going to connect to the file path node. And this allows me to select a file. So I'm just going to browse, and I'll save this to my desktop. And I'm going to call this master plan data. And so this will be the name of my spreadsheet. Okay, so now I also need to give it a sheet name. So I'm going to create a code block, and I'm going to call this floor data. So that's the name of our sheet. And let's connect that. And then I also need to provide it with the start row and the start column. So I'm going to add another line to my code block, and I'm just going to put a 0 and a colon. So now I can connect the start row is just 0, and then also I can connect this to my start column. There we go. Okay, and then the last thing I need to provide it with is the data. So I'm going to take my list, transpose, and I'm just going to plug it in. And you can see when I do that, automatically Excel pops up. So right now I have a link. It's a live link, so I'll show you in a second. Any changes that I make in Revit will be reflected in this Excel file. So let me do that right now. And I think this is one of the real powers of Dynamo. Like this, there are add-ins you can get with Revit that will do this. But the flexibility that you get in Dynamo, essentially I can specify exactly what parameters I want to export. And then I can just, create my graph, and then I can export them right away. And then it's updated real time. So let me go into Revit, and let's say, if I want to make this building a little bit bigger, I do that. And now I go into Dynamo, and it gets updated. Let me see if I can do a split screen. more or less. And you can see it updating the data real time. Okay, so let's make this building here a little bit bigger. And you can see Dynamo updates and refreshes itself. Let's make that bigger. If I were to get rid of, let's get rid of this building here. And you can see it should, I think it got rid of it. Okay, but it's working back and forth. I think it did something where it got rid of it but didn't take it out. But now actually one other thing I can do is if I copy one of these buildings, it's going to add that area in as well. So here we go. Now I have that additional area down there. So oops, it's a live link, like I said. So I'm getting all of that data. Let me see if I have anything. Okay. And it actually, in this case, I think it didn't take something out that already was there. So let's go back into Dynamo. And it doesn't have to be a live link. Like if I close, what I'm going to do actually, let me save my Dynamo graph here. And that live link is maintained only when Dynamo is open. So let's go master plan data. I'm going to save that. And now I'm just going to close Dynamo. So now I still have the Excel file open, but I don't have the link between the two. So Dynamo is what provides that link. I'm just going to close Excel. And let's go back into Revit and I'll reopen Dynamo. And you can make this, it can work in reverse. Essentially, though, what I would need to do is create another graph that inputs data from Excel. So, okay. And let's go back into Dynamo. I'm actually going to change this file. Let's do another version. We'll call it master plan data 2. And that'll just give us a fresh set of data. Okay, great. So yeah, if I wanted to read the data from Excel into Revit, there's another node that I could use called, let me just pull it up, Excel read from file, which is this one here. So I can then read data in, so I could populate, if I wanted to create a series of sheets, for example, I can read the data from Excel, create, a whole series of Dynamo nodes that would create my sheets from that data. But it doesn't, it's not like it's a two-way. So if I have my Excel file that I'm getting from write to file, I can't change those values, and they won't work backwards and update Excel that way. If I use read from file, then I could do it. So a lot of times if you're doing kind of read-write operations in Dynamo, you would have a graph that would have kind of write file to file here, and then you'd also have a read file, and you'd turn one on or off depending on what you're doing. So it's not a true two-way relationship. Okay. All right, so we have our graph. We have our Excel file right here. There's a question about, do you need Excel on the same machine? I believe that you do. I know somebody asked me a question about that, and they had, they were using a Mac and they had Boot Camp on it, and they had, Revit on the Windows side, and then they had Excel on the Apple side. And so this particular node wasn't working because it didn't find Excel. So I think it needs to have Excel exactly on, on that machine and accessible. Okay, so here we go. We have our raw data. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new spreadsheet. And this is the spreadsheet that we're going to use for our dashboard. Let me zoom in a little bit. Now, to use and create the dashboard, what we're going to do is we're going to use pivot tables, and we're going to use pivot tables and pivot charts. If you haven't used pivot tables before, essentially they're a way in Excel that, an easy way in Excel that you can summarize data. I'd always heard about pivot tables for a long time, and like I had no idea what they were, what they did. I was a little bit scared of them, and I kind of dug into it, and that's when I started on ArchSmarter the whole Excel for Architects series, because I'm like, I know there's a lot you can do with Excel. I have no idea how to do it. So that was my kind of excuse to dig into it. And now I've gotten like, oh, these are really cool, and they're not that hard, and they're a great way to create dashboards, which is what I'm going to show you. So the first thing to do, I'm just going to go up. I have a blank Excel file. Let me save this. And I'm separating. I'm not going to do this in the same file as the data that's coming out of Revit. And I will tell you why. Hold on 1 second. So let's call this Master Plan Dashboard. So every time that I open Revit, and then when I open Dynamo, and when I run that node that's exporting all my floor data, in essence, Dynamo's creating a new Excel spreadsheet each time. So if I were to add some stuff to that, and if I wanted to add a new sheet, for example, and I'm going to add some data here, and then I save that. Let's close it. I'm going to close Dynamo. I'm going to save my changes, and then when I reopen it, and I reopen that particular graph, again, it's going to create a new version of that spreadsheet. So any changes that I made are now going to be lost. And let's go. Here it is. Oops. I didn't close it, so it didn't run it. And let's find it in my list. Okay. So I want to make sure that I kind of separate the two. And also, the one good thing about creating a dashboard is that if I create it in a separate file, I can actually reuse it with other projects. So I can create one dashboard like I'm doing right now for Master Plan. And if you kind of spend a lot of the time to figure out exactly what metrics, I could then reuse that dashboard with other data sets from other projects. So it's really good to separate the data itself from the actual presentation of that data. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a pivot table. And I just go into the Insert ribbon, I click on Insert, and then I have the Pivot Table option. So from here, I can either select a table in my current Excel file, or I have an option here to use an external data source. So I'm going to use an external data source, and I'm going to, actually, this is an old one. I'm going to browse for my Excel file, the original that Excel file that I got out of Dynamo. So I'm going to use this one, Master Plan Data 2. And I click Open. And inside of this, I can choose which worksheet that I want to bring in. So I'm going to use the Floor Data worksheet. I click OK. And then I click OK. So essentially, what Excel is doing is it's creating a link between that spreadsheet and my dashboard spreadsheet. So now I'm in kind of dashboard mode, and so I have this new window palette over here. And one step that I forgot to do in Dynamo is I didn't add headers to my data, which is unfortunate, because now I have to sort through this here and figure out exactly what I'm looking at. I can go ahead and I can open my spreadsheet and take a look, or I can kind of guess, or if I'm smart, what I can do, let me go back, is I'm going to just add a couple nodes here to give me some headers, just so it's a little bit easier to understand what I'm looking at. So I'm just going to create a new code block, and I'm going to add my headers here. So I want to know the, let's go, building type, and then we'll call the next one building. And I probably should have done this as I was setting up my graph, but let's do it right now. And then I'm going to do one for level. We'll do one for usage. Zoom in here. And we have area. And exterior surface. Okay, now from here I'm going to create another list using my headers. Drag this, I'm going to disconnect all this kind of reminds me in the Matrix, like those little monsters with the squiggly, those octopus monsters. Okay, so now I'm going to connect here to create a list of my headers. And this is more just a formatting issue, so it's easier to work with the data. And here, okay. And now I want to make sure that I'm getting things in the right order, and I may need to reorganize these nodes here to get things out the way that I want. So the first thing I want is, I'm going to connect this. I'm just going to reorder my parameters as they're coming out. So we're going to get mass family, and then, actually let's do that, and then mass family will be next. This is going to be a little bit messy for a second. Then I want to get the level, so that's going to go into this third one. And then I want to get, after level, I have usage, okay. So that's the fourth one. And then the last two are going to be area and exterior surface. Okay. So this is actually another nice thing that I can basically reorder my columns in Dynamo, and then they will update themselves in Excel. And the last one, exterior surface. Okay. And I'm getting, you'll see that, and I have that file open. So I'm going to close that file. Anytime you get an error in Dynamo, if you gave it the wrong input or made a mistake, you'll get this yellow box up top, and it's telling you that you did something wrong. So it's always good to keep an eye out for those. So now I'm going to browse, and I'm actually going to browse back to my original file here, master plan data. Okay. So now Dynamo's thinking. Now everything's kosher because it got rid of that yellow box. There's a question about, does Dynamo work with Google Sheets? I believe it does. I think there's a series of nodes that will work with Google Sheets. I haven't used them, but that's a good point. And then another question. So the Excel file, so we actually, what we're dealing with now, we have our Revit model. We have our Dynamo graph, which we're using to take the Revit data, put it into Excel. And then we have a second Excel file which contains our dashboard. So we have a lot of links here. Dynamo is linked to Revit. Then we have our data spreadsheet, which is linked to Dynamo. And then we have our dashboard spreadsheet, which is linked to our data spreadsheet. So there are some dependencies here. But let's go back and let's make sure. Okay. So here's our data coming out of Dynamo. We've reordered it. We have the building and family, the building, the level, we have the usage, and we have the external area. Okay. We didn't connect our headers in yet, but let's do that right now. So we've created a list with the headers, and all we're going to do is we're going to use a node called list.add_item_to_front. And essentially, we're going to take this list, we're going to add that to the front of this list. So now when we look at our data here, the very first row of our spreadsheet is going to list our headers. Again, it's kind of a lot of work to go through to do this, but it makes it a little bit easier to work with the data once we get it into Excel. And now I'm going to plug this to data here. So now, at long last, when I go back into my Excel file, here are my headers here. So type, building, level, usage, area, exterior surface. Okay, so that's working out great. Now let me switch back to my dashboard spreadsheet. And I'm going to go ahead, let me create a new worksheet, and I'm going to call this dashboard. And now I'm going to create my pivot table. So again, I go up to Insert, and I click on Pivot Table. And I want to go to Use External Data Source. And I'm going to browse for my file. Again, that's on my desktop. And as long as, basically when you're setting this up, in particular, this connection from one spreadsheet to the next, you want to ideally have that location be fairly stable. So you don't, if you're going to be moving the files around, you're going to have to go back and remap that connection. It's better, the more stable it is. If you're not going to be moving stuff around, it's just better because then you don't have to, basically remap that connection. So I click OK. Okay, so now I can get back to my pivot table dialog, and now it's easier for me to choose which fields I want to include in my pivot table. So essentially I'm going to create a pivot table that summarizes, I want to look at the various usages, I want to look at the buildings, and then I want to look at the areas. So all I have to do is pick the the data from the list. So I'm going to take building, and I want to choose level, type, and usage. Now down here in the bottom, you can see that I can drag these fields around in order to either create filters or I can create columns, and then I can also group them. So here in the lower right hand corner, and I can't zoom, I can zoom in on the pivot table but not, I'm going to order this. So I want to look at the buildings grouped or ordered by usage. Then I want to order by building. I'm actually going to get rid of this type option. So I want to look at usage, building, level, and then I want it to sum up my area. So if I drag the area over to the count of area, oops, let me go click on this again, and I actually don't want count of area. I'm going to change my field setting to be the sum of the areas. So I can now get, here is the summary, and we're getting usage, sum of area, building, and level. Okay, and this is I get my grand total area here at the bottom. So I can see the area for each building, and essentially this is giving me, I'm getting the usages, oops, I'm categorizing by usage, and then I'm looking at by usage, by building, by level. So here is my summary table. Now I have that pivot table. What I can do to make this a little bit more interactive, if I click on the pivot table and go to Analyze, I can insert what's called a slicer. So this gives me a way to dynamically change the value of my pivot table. So I'm going to do this so I can change by usage, and I click OK. So now I can actually sort by education, by the usage, and I can see that vary itself. For some reason, I've got something funny going on, and it's showing me building 7 and 8 as part of the usage. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I'll have to look at that. But at this, again, I can sort things out. And if I made some changes, and I just do a refresh, as I make changes in the Revit model, these values are going to change as well. So let me switch back to Revit, and I'm going to change some of these floors here. The usage from residential, let's change them to office. And now I can switch back into my data spreadsheet, and Dynamo is going to, I see what happened. Okay, let me get rid of something kind of transposed in here. I'll have to see what's going on in the graph. I think that I delete that. Now I can go back to my dashboard here. If I refresh, and then it's going, it will update itself accordingly. So now, once I have my pivot table, what I can do is I can actually go and I can create a pivot chart. So if I want to see this visually, I can do like a pie chart, for example, and I can click on that, and I'm going to move my slicer down. And so now these are linked. So as I move through my slicer, I'm seeing all of my office area. And it's broken out by building and by level. And if I add residential, I can see that here as well. And I'm getting my area totals by building and by level. And then same thing here. I go through and I can see the individual retail. Now, if I were to add a new usage, and let's try that in Revit, and let's add the top 2 floors, we'll call these amenities. Okay, and we'll switch over to our data. So I can see that it added the amenities floor here as a new usage. And now when I switch over to my dashboard and I'm going to go over to data and I'm going to refresh, you can see that now amenities got picked up here as well. So again, because I have this dynamic link established, so I'm linking from Dynamo to my Excel spreadsheet, and then I link my dashboard to the data Excel. So it's all working together. I can update Revit, it's going to update Excel, and it's going to update the dashboard. Now I could create some additional pivot tables as well. So I'm going to do these real quick. I'm going to create another pivot table. Let's say I wanted to track like the total area by usage. So I'm going to go again to my external data source. I'm going to choose the connection. I already have a connection established, so I can just open that. Excuse me. Here we go. And now I'm going to say I want to get usage and area. So all I'm looking at is the total area by usage. And in this pivot table, I'm going to, again, insert a pivot chart. And let's just do another pie chart. And here I can name this. So this is just a chart that's based on this data here. And I'm going to call this total area by usage. I spelled that wrong. And I can copy this chart to my dashboard, and it will maintain, it's going to maintain that link to the data. So now even if I change things here, this slicer is interacting with this pivot table and this chart, but it's keeping this one separate. So I can work through that. Actually, I'm going to delete that slicer for a second, see if I remake it, if it will get rid of that issue. And let's take usage. Okay, it's still finding that building 7. It's remembering building 7 and building 8. I won't worry about that right now. I'm just going to save this real quick. So I can create, again, another one. Say I want to look at, say the total floor heights. How many, how many stories does each building have? So I'm going to go, again, make another sheet here and create another pivot table and choose the same data source, which is this floor data. Okay. We hit OK. So now what I want to get is building, and I want to take levels. So here are all the buildings, here are all the levels. Now what I want to see is the number of levels per building. So I'm going to drag the level, and it's going to into the values field in my pivot table, and I'm going to take count of level. So I can see building 1 has 3 levels, building 2 has 12, building 3 has 2, and so on. So I can add this. And again, if I'm in kind of concept design and I'm working on a master plan, I may want to see building heights or building levels relative to each other. So I'm going to make a, let's do a stacked column here, and we'll call this floor levels. Okay, so again, I can see my buildings here. I'm going to copy this over to my dashboard, and let's add that. Now, if I go into Revit, and let's say I'm going to add some levels. If I click, let me see what I have for floor levels. Let's add a couple more. I'm going to pull this tower up a bit. It's looking a little short. Let me add, I'm going to just copy a couple additional floor levels, and then we'll add them to that tower. Okay, so I can, and so I added the levels. I just need to go ahead, add my mass floors. Here we go. Okay, so now Dynamo's done its thing, and I can switch over to my dashboard, and again, I just have to go up to data, refresh all, and you can see that it actually increased. It was very slight, but now we're up to 15 floor levels in building 2. If I were to go back into Revit, and let's say, we're looking at this and we need, some additional residential. We're just going to add another tower over here. Oops, not exactly where I wanted it, but that's fine. Let's say that looks good. Okay, so we added a whole new building. And Dynamo, again, we have that live connection. I'm just going to go refresh, and you can see it added all that area as well. So let's do one last, just do one last chart, if I can, real quick. And I'm going to add, oops, a pivot chart. And again, you have a lot of options here in terms of how you want to visualize the data. So let's just do a bar chart, and we'll set that here. And now what I'm getting, I'm looking at floors. Let's see if I can turn that. So I can look at this data in a whole bunch of different ways. Some of this, this may not be the most useful diagram, but I can play with this a whole bunch of different ways. Again, it's all coming from that same data source, and I can take it, either as a fixed thing, or I can take it as a portion. I can make it dynamic. A couple things I probably want to do here, if I want to just add some white space and titles, so I can insert, a couple of blank columns here just to give myself a little bit of room. And if I go up to page layout, I can turn off the grid lines. So that looks a little bit better. And there we go. There's a question about whether or not you can set the dashboard to refresh automatically, and that's a good question. I don't know the answer. I'd have to see. I suspect not, because they want to, the idea is to, you may or may not want that to happen. I'm guessing the default is that Excel wants you to be deliberate about when you want to refresh that data. It doesn't want to assume, that you always want to do. But I'll check and see if there's a way to do that. And then as the last thing I can do is I can print this. It's an Excel file. There's nothing really special to it. So I can set this up. Let me make this as landscape. And I'm going to set it to scale, so fit it onto a sheet, so I can print it out however I want. And so this is just a really simple example, but, I think there's a lot of possibility here. And, I'd love to hear also different usages. Like I listed some at the very beginning, but I think there's a lot that you could do here to make some really powerful, really useful dashboards. Okay, sorry. Losing my voice. Now, let's just switch back into, okay. So we're almost at our hour that we've allocated. And again, I just kind of gave you an overview of how to do this. But a couple things, or a few things to remember. One is that you want to create a separate Excel file for your Revit data. And that's the data that's coming out from Dynamo. And then you also want to create another file for your dashboard. And then you want to connect the Revit data to the dashboard pivot tables. And you need to refresh, the dashboard to update the data. And then lastly, just in terms of presentation, you want to turn off your grid lines and then add some white space and some titles. I had one other thing. Actually, I wanted to show you this as well. When you're in Excel, and let's go back. I had mentioned one of the benefits to separating out the dashboard as its own Excel file is that you can then reuse it. So I'm in the data ribbon in Excel, and if I go into connections, here are all the connections. So this is, I have an old connection here to one of the earlier. Actually, let me see if I remove that, if it breaks it or not. But essentially, these are the links. These are the links to the data. If I go on properties, I can see, and I can see, actually, in this case, this is good. I have options here in terms of refreshing the data. So I can set this to refresh every minute. So as I'm working on my dashboard, Excel, the dashboard Excel file is going to refresh the data in the other linked Excel file every minute. And I can also set it to refresh when it opens the file. So that's probably about as automatic as you can get it. Now, if I also click into the definition, you can see here's the connection file. So in theory, I could browse, I could save this dashboard file, and then I could browse to a new data source. And as long as it I'm going to test this, but as long as the fields map up, it should be able to pull that data straight into my pivot tables and my pivot charts. So you spend some time developing a dashboard that then you can use on other projects. And you already have the Dynamo graph. So again, getting that data out is pretty straightforward. So you can develop a really nice workflow to get that and present this information in this way. So let's get back here. Okay, just a few more things. Yeah, like I said, presentation matters. I did not a great job of developing a really nice looking dashboard, but we did it quick. So I could certainly spend a lot more time making that dashboard look really nice. And again, I'm just working with Excel elements. So there's really no magic there. Now, I mentioned that I had a special offer for you. If you're interested in learning more about Dynamo, I am going to be launching a Dynamo course from ArchSmarter. I did the Mastering Revit Macros course last year, so this is my second course that I've developed. This course, it's project-based, and I've developed a series of step-by-step tutorials. The assumption is, that if you don't have any Dynamo experience, or if you have very little, this will take you through a whole series of exercises to develop your Dynamo skills. It's access anytime, so I've recorded all the lessons as kind of videos, similar to what we do here in our webinars, and so it's all up on a course website. You can access it, like I said, anytime you have a login. There's all the sample files for each lesson, and there's also a discussion board, so if you have questions, you can do that. I'm going to launch the course officially on next Thursday, but I'm offering, for those of you who are here on the webinar, a special pre-sale rate. So it's $50 off. The regular price is $197, so I'm giving you a special rate, $50 off. And this is good until Wednesday of next week. So you can go to archsmarter.com, learning-dynamo, and the coupon code when you go to checkout is pre-sale. So take a look. Here's the curriculum. So we start with the basics of going through how to work with Dynamo. One of the big exercises we're going to do is creating a parametric tower, and I'll show you some examples of that. But it's a multi-story, fully parametric tower, and that you can flex, push, and pull. And we're going to use that tower through all the subsequent exercises. So we'll look at importing and exporting data out to Excel. We're going to create sheets and views, and we'll create sheets from Excel as well as doing it automatically. We have a lesson in there for visualizing parameter data and how we can start to modify the model based on, say, like relationships to the sun and solar orientation. And then we're also going to look at defining design rules. So how can we basically create the structure for the tower that is also fully parametric. And I'm going to be adding additional modules to the course as we go along based on your input. So if there's particular topics that that are missing or that you feel would be really important, the idea is I'm going to add additional content as we go. And again, this is kind of some screenshots of the model set and the graphs we're going to develop. So here's the twisting tower. And these are all using the same, were created using the same Dynamo graph. And then we take that graph and we start looking at, again, some of that parameter data and see how we can visualize that in Revit and then use that data to modify and transform the model itself. This is a shot of the course website. So when you log in, you'll see here, here are the modules. So you can click on that and then you get the video, and then there's also sample files in there as well. There's the discussion, so you can go through. Oops. So again, if you go to archsmarter.com and learning-dynamo, that will take you to the website. If you register now, and again, if you use that pre-sale coupon code, I'm in the process of adding all the content. Right now you can get the first module, and you can actually, if you register, you can watch those for free. And then between now and next Wednesday night, I'm going to be adding all the additional content. I have it created, I just have to upload it. So that's going to be that process between now and next Thursday. So by next Thursday, all the content will be up there and ready, but you can get it at that special pre-sale rate. And thank you very much for spending the time. Like I said at the beginning, I have recorded this session, so I'm going to make this available. I'll probably send an email tomorrow, and that email will have a link to the replay, and I'll also include a link for the Dynamo course. And that's it. Thank you very much.